I'm sure Cornel West needs no introduction to my audience. He's one of the most prominent left wing intellectuals in the country. To me, he's one of the most influential figures in the country, probably in the world. And not just in his views on politics and on policies and his critiques of capitalism and U.S. empire and all that stuff. Of course, I agree with him on that. But more than that, personally, I find Cornel West to be a huge inspiration for so many different reasons. His appreciation of the arts, whatever kind it might be, literature, theater, music, history, and it's across all genres, comedy. And the way that he views the arts is, yes, it's entertaining, but it's more than that. It's intertwined with the human experience. You cannot separate those things. And also, there are lessons to be learned from the arts, from the all those different things that I mentioned. They can be applied in your life in different ways. So I love his appreciation of the arts and history and all that stuff. So one issue that Cornel West has talked about consistently throughout his career is the indifference to injustice and to suffering that we have in this country and in our society. Another one of the quotes that he likes to use often is, indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. And the way I like to view that concept is through the example of the Iraq War. Yes, Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all the neocons and the defense contractors who lied us into this war that killed millions of people in Iraq and throughout the Middle East. Yes, all those people are terrible. They're criminals. They're war criminals. But like I said, they are war criminals. It is in their nature to do heinous things like this. But the real evil is not that those things occurred. It was that our entire country, our society, chose to look the other way and not hold any of these people accountable and really normalize genocide for profit and lying and starting offensive illegal wars against countries that did not attack us. That was where the real evil occurred, because now, like I said, it's normalized. Now, the Iraq War, it happened, there were no consequences, and now even more violent military interventions are inevitable because there were no consequences, because nobody was held accountable. So that for me, that's how I interpret that quote. Indifference to evil is worse than evil itself, because it allows the evil to continue indefinitely. And Cornel West talks about how this indifference to suffering, this indifference to evil, it may happen for different reasons in different people. Some people who are at the bottom of the social and economic ladder, they themselves might be experiencing suffering and hard times. So they are so consumed in just trying to get through the day, they're not really worried about the Iraqis being massacred by the U.S. military for no reason. They like I said, they're just trying to get through the day. So they've become indifferent to that kind of suffering, to suffering of people who are not in their direct vicinity. But that indifference to suffering also manifests in different ways, like people who are higher up in society, the wealthy, some of the elites, people who are well off. For them, yeah, they may see that these things are happening. They may feel bad about it. And, they might do a little charity once in a while, or talk about an issue in a very vague, general way with no real policy solutions. Because even though they may think whatever it is, say it's endless war, say it's wealth inequality, say it's extreme poverty in this country, they may feel that those things are wrong, but they're not going to risk their position in society, their whether it's in terms of wealth or elite status or professional accomplishments. They're not willing to put all of that on the line to speak truth to power and actually demand real or have a real structural critique of our system and why things are the way that they are, and they don't want to propose the radical change that need to be done to fix it. Because like I said, they're more worried about their own personal status than speaking truth to power. So that's another way that this indifference to suffering manifests. On this issue, Cornel West has been stronger than anybody else in condemning this kind of cowardice and this kind of because the way he views the world, it's more important to speak truth to power on these important issues and consequences be damned than it is to just hold your head down and go along to get along and try not to rock the boat. He's been more vocal on this issue or this kind of behavior from society than I've seen anybody else. So for me, I always wondered what the dynamic was between him and Bernie Sanders in their personal relationship, and also when he was working on the campaign, because Bernie Sanders will call out wealth inequality. He'll talk about the importance of Medicare for all and a living wage and workers' rights and getting money out of politics. He'll talk about the importance of those issues in a general way, but he won't ever do the real critiques. He won't ever directly call out the architects of this neoliberalism and the austerity economic politics, the corporatism. He will never just directly say, these people are responsible for it, this is exactly how they did it, and they don't care about you. Bernie will never go that far. And so he fits into that category of, I see that these are problems, I'm kind of moved by it, but I'm not moved too much that I will just completely speak uncensored and speak truth to power and directly call out the people who are responsible for the state of affairs, because he's afraid of whatever the political ramifications might be. He's afraid of whatever the media is going to say about him. He's afraid of losing committee assignments. He's afraid of the professional consequences that he might suffer. He's afraid that he might lose an election, whatever it is. He's afraid of actually speaking truth to power in a real way. And right now, it's more obvious than ever, but it's been pretty clear if you've closely followed Bernie Sanders that this is kind of the way he acts. So I've always been interested in how Cornel West, what he thought about this. And when he was asked on Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper's Useful Idiots podcast, which I love, I watch almost every episode that they do, he was asked about it and he answered in a very honest way. So we're going to take a look at the clip and come back and discuss it.
What Bernie represented, and sometimes it was not always intentional, because Bernie himself, I think, has an ambivalence about his relation to the neoliberal wing of the ruling class in our society, that in principle, he has a very heartfelt critique, and his movement is over against the democratic neoliberal establishment. At the same time, he's been in Congress for so long that his world has been shaped by having some alliance and coalition with the neoliberal ruling class of the country, that he has a connection and he does not mind belonging. Mm. He's not obsessed with it, but he doesn't mind belonging. Because, I do believe that you have to be jazz-like and improvisational and always have an inside-outside strategy. Mm-hmm. And I like his inside-outside strategy. A lot of times it should have a little bit more dance in it. And what I mean by dance in it, you got to be able to move quickly. You know what I mean? You can't be flat-footed at all. You can't get caught in one stance too long. You can't be stationary and static for too long. Whereas I think Bernie, given his history, he was just lucky to get included at all as an independent. Mm-hmm. See, that's why his relation to Biden is something that, many of us, both understand but would never be part of it. You see, he could run around and talk about how wonderful Biden is. He's a decent man. He embraced me. He and Jane and me and Jane and his wife could go off and socialize and have these wonderful times. I said, hey, I appreciate, sensitivity to people's humanity. I don't want to be reductionist about these relationships. But, Biden is still Biden. And let us be very clear about that in terms of architect of the largest prison system in the history of the modern world. geared at poor people, disproportionately chocolate, or a war. There's a war of a crime against humanity. More than 500,000 Iraqis killed, each life precious. He can't say hardly a mumbling word about it and brags about it for so long, up until a few years ago. You know, those for me, that is the so much of the ugliness and the callousness of the neoliberal project. You see that it just turns its back on these vicious policies and then brings in some black folk and some women and some gays and lesbians and so let's make the class hierarchy much more colorful.
Right.
And we want inclusive and we want diversity and so forth and so on. It's that kind of orientation that Bernie's critical of in principle, even though on the ground he's still very much a part of it. And it's understandable given the fact that he's had to deal with that every day of his life for over 30 years.
It reminds me of I always think of it as...
Wow, so much of that was just spot on. And again, it's even more impactful that this critique is coming from somebody who knows Bernie Sanders, who's close with Bernie Sanders, who was a co-chair on his presidential campaign. So this isn't just some rando lefty on Twitter or on YouTube who thinks Bernie's too cozy with the establishment, thinks Bernie's too cozy with the corporate Democrats. No, these are Bernie Sanders' closest advisors and allies saying this. So it gives it that much more weight. So let me break down some of the stuff that Cornel was talked about. All right, so the first point he makes is about how, yes, Bernie Sanders does have these heartfelt critiques of capitalism, of the political system. He does think that it's serving the rich and it's done nothing but cause economic devastation and hardship and suffering for the masses in this country. Bernie actually believes that. But what has happened was he has been in Congress for 30 years now. He talks about this inside-outside strategy and how you need the activists, the real lefties, the grassroots to work with some allies in Congress to get progressive, to get lefty legislation through. He says that, but he does. I don't know if he even realizes how much he has focused on trying to get these these policies through the mechanisms of Congress, that he's focused on that to the detriment of the outside game that he says is so crucial. And that might be why he's so afraid of criticizing Democratic leadership, because to him, in his world, all he sees is committees and task forces and floor votes and leadership positions. That's all he sees. So he's not using grassroots pressure to wield power. The only way he sees power wielded is through the mechanisms of Congress. So he thinks it's paramount to the movement, it's paramount to getting lefty policies, that he has maximum influence in Congress. And through doing that, he's going to try to suck up to the corporate Democrats. And he's not going to call Chuck Schumer a useless, horrific, right-wing corporatist leader of the Democratic caucus in the Senate. He's not going to call him that because he's afraid that, I don't know what he's afraid of, but he's afraid that he's going to lose some of the influence. He's going to lose some of the sway. He's going to lose some of the powers that he has, or the control that he has, however little it may be, to influence the mechanisms of Congress to get lefty policies. But like I'm saying, he's just so caught up in it because that's all he sees for the last 30 years that he doesn't realize that isn't getting us any lefty policies. That's not getting us any lefty policies, and it's really not getting us any closer. And then his critique about Joe Biden in particular, Bernie Sanders' relationship to Joe Biden in particular, that really was spot on. Because Bernie just really has this bizarre disconnect between his friendship with Joe Biden and all the horrific shit that Joe Biden has done throughout his career. He thinks that those things are just separate. And to be fair to Bernie, I think that's a human quality that we all have. We all are friends with people who have done bad things, in some cases terrible things that we don't agree with, and goes against our own principles. And we're still friends with them because we have a personal connection, we have a personal relationship. But it's very different when you are both such prominent figures in politics on completely opposing sides. Bernie Sanders was leading, at a time, he was leading a lefty movement against every single thing that Joe Biden has done and supported throughout his career. You are fundamentally at odds with every single thing that this man has done throughout his career. And he represents all the things that you say are bad in this country. The corruption, the subservience to the lobbyists and political donors and corporations. That is all Joe Biden. And when you're in a position where you're leading a movement like a huge movement, grassroots populist movement like Bernie Sanders was, against the establishment, you aren't just a regular average person. And you have to consider how your personal relationship with the opposition is affecting how you're leading the movement. Because as we saw, those things are not separate. Bernie Sanders' friendship with Joe Biden, it wasn't just that once in a while he'll go out and have dinner with his wife and they'll have a nice conversation or they watch a movie or whatever like that. It extended into his campaign, it extended into his movement to where he wouldn't even call Joe Biden out for all of his endless corrupt decisions that he's made throughout his lifetime. That was off limits for Bernie Sanders, and he made it off limits for the people who worked on his campaign too. So you handicapped your movement, diminish the chances of their success because you were so invested in this personal relationship with Joe Biden. That is a complete failure to the people that you claim to be representing. And in Joe Biden's case, it's even worse. It's particularly egregious because it's not like Joe Biden had principled policy positions that he took, and he genuinely believed that this would make the country better. Joe Biden himself has said he takes the policy positions he takes, he does the things that he does to prostitute himself to the political donors, to sell himself out to the political donors, and whatever happens to the country be damned. All he's worried about is serving the donors so he can maintain political power and get even more political power. As craven and conniving as it gets, as low as it gets. And then like Cornel West talks about, the policies that he supports add another layer of horrendousness to this entire thing. The mass incarceration. We have more people in prison than any other country around the world. And that was a direct result of Joe Biden and his subservience to his donors who benefited from his tough on crime stance. He was willing to lock up millions of people who are already dealt a bad hand by our society on purpose, intentionally, through systemic racism. He was willing to lock up millions of them, destroy their families, all because that was what was politically convenient for him. What does that say about you as a human being? That is a disgusting action, and I don't understand how Bernie Sanders can just yuck it up with him as if he didn't do that, as if he didn't do the Iraq War and is responsible for over 1 million Iraqi deaths and the deaths of U.S. soldiers on his hands, again, at the behest of his political donors, and there is no justifying that. There's no way he thought that was what was best for the country. Everybody knew the Iraq War was a lie, and Joe Biden went along with it anyway for political convenience. What kind of person is that? On all the other wars and interventions that he supported, Libya, Syria, Yemen, the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, Joe Biden has done the most horrific things that a human being can possibly do on this planet. All in the name of corruption, all in the name of serving his donors, all in the name of his own political career. And I don't understand how Bernie Sanders is just so willing to overlook it, but he did. And that's why that's one of the major reasons why his campaign failed. That's one of the major reasons. And if you can extrapolate this to his relationship to all the corporate Democrats that he's so friendly with and doesn't ever want to call out by name, when you take all that into account and how he's willing to overlook all of that, you see why he's so feckless. You see why he's such a coward. You see why he's never willing to actually speak truth to power. So this was a great interview that Cornel West did with Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper. The whole thing was great. You should watch it. But this part really stood out to me with his honesty about Bernie Sanders' inexcusable relationship with some of the worst corporate Democrats and establishment politicians in this country, when he was at the same time claiming to be leading a populist revolution to overthrow that very same political establishment.